women, Johnny, it's tough, you know?
Yeah.
Gotta get a woman you can trust. Trust is the whole thing.
You betcha.
I was going one girl for a while. I trusted her. She let me down.
Oh?
Now, what happened was, you know, she ran away with my best friend.
Oh.
Now I got no dog.
Good morning. It's Friday, Aristotle Friday, September the 22nd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we'll have Hugh-Hewitt, matoa-bartiromo, conflict of interest, my take, rules for patriots, rules for retrogrades, no free lunch, the rape of the mind, bishop-barron, governor-abbott, Jonathan-Turley, and Aristotle. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
But crony capitalism, erodes our overall standard of living and stifles entrepreneurs by rewarding the politically favored rather than those who provide what consumers want. Charles G. Koch. It does this in a lot of ways. It misallocates resources, it undermines trust in market mechanisms, it builds cynicism in the society, and it distorts markets away from their natural outcomes. If any of these things are acceptable, then what do we need free markets for at all?
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Mass delusion. It is interesting to note that the phenomenon of institutionalized mass delusion has so far received little scientific treatment, although the term is bandied about wherever the problems of political propaganda are discussed. But science is shied away from scrutinizing the collective mental aberration we call mass delusion when it is connected with present-day affairs. It is the historical examples, such as witchcraft and certain forms of mass hysteria, that have been examined in great detail. In our era of warring ideologies, in a time of battle for man's mind, this question demands attention. What is mass delusion? How does it arise? What can we do to combat it? The fact that I have made an analogy between the totalitarian frame of mind and the disease of mental withdrawal known as schizophrenia indicates that I consider the totalitarian ideology delusional and the totalitarian frame of mind a pathological distortion that may occur in anyone. When we tentatively define delusion as the loss of an independent, verifiable reality with a consequent relapse into a more primitive state of awareness, we can see how the phenomenon of totalitarianism itself can be considered delusional. For it is delusional, unadapted to reality, to think of man as an obedient machine. It is delusional to deny his dynamic nature and to try to arrest all his thinking and acting at an infantile stage of submission to authority. It is delusional to believe that there is any one simple answer to the many problems with which life confronts us. And it is delusional to believe that man is so rigid, so unyielding in his structure that he has no ambivalences, no doubts, no conflicts, no warring drives within him. Where thinking is isolated without free exchange with other minds and can no longer expand, delusion may follow. Whenever ideas are compartmentalized, behind and between curtains, the process of continual alert confrontation of facts and reality is hampered. The system freezes, becomes rigid, and dies of delusion. Examples of this can be found in very small communities cut off from the world. On fishing vessels, which have been at sea a long time, contagious religious mania coupled with ritual murder has been known to break out. In small village communities, there are instances of collective delusion, often under the influence of one obsessed person. The same thing happens in the more gigantic totalitarian communities, cut off from contact with the rest of the world. Is this not what happened in Hinder Germany, when free verification and self-correction were forbidden? Indeed, we can show that historically this is the case with every secluded civilization. If there is not interchange with other people, the civilization degenerates and becomes the victim of its own delusions and dies. We can phrase the concept of delusion in a different way. It is a more primitive, distorted form of thinking found in groups or individuals, looked at only from their limited viewpoint. Delusional thinking doesn't know the concept of delusional thinking. The fakir lying on his bed of nails would be called a deluded man if he exhibited his devotion on Fifth Avenue, but among his own people his behavior is considered saintly and eminently sane. A member of a primitive tribe will not see in the ceremony of devil exorcism or a revival meeting an instance of mass delusion. But a man who has passed through this stage of mental development to a level of greater perspective and awareness will recognize that delusional notions lie behind such ceremonies. Whether or not we are able to detect delusion when it appears depends entirely on circumstances, upon the state of civilization in which we live, upon the groups and the social classes to which we belong. For delusion and retrogression are terms which imply a special social and intellectual level of awareness. That is why it is so difficult to detect the delusions and primitive rituals in our own midst. Our present-day civilization is full of mass delusions, prejudices, and collective errors which can be recognized easily if viewed from above, but which cannot be detected if they are seen from within. While the delusion of witchcraft has been banished, we have never freed ourselves from the delusion of cultural or racial inferiority and superiority. Medieval mass obsessions such as Tarantinism and St. Vitus's dance are little known now among Western nations. In their place, we have mass meetings with shouting crowds expressing in delusional ecstasy their affiliation to some political delusion. Instead of the dance fury, we have the raving frenzy of the motor or the passive peeping contagion of the television screen. As we saw in the chapter on totalitaria, mass delusion can be induced. It is simply a question of organizing and manipulating collective thinking in the proper way. If one can isolate the mass, allow no free thinking, no free exchange, no outside corrective, and can hypnotize the group daily with noises, with press and radio and television, with fear and pseudo-enthusiasms, any delusion can be instilled. People will begin to accept the most primitive and inappropriate acts. Outside occurrences are usually the triggers that unleash hidden hysterical and delusional complexes in people. Collective madness justifies the repressed personal madness in each individual. That is why it is so easy to sloganize people into the mass hysteria of war. The outside enemy who is attacked by vituperative slogans is merely the scapegoat and substitute for all the anger and anxiety that lives inside the harassed people. Delusions carefully implanted are difficult to correct. Reasoning no longer has value, for the lower, more animal type of thinking becomes deaf to any thought on a higher level. If one reasons with the totalitarian who has been impregnated with official cliches, he will sooner or later withdraw into his fortress of collective totalitarian thinking. The mass delusion that gives him his feelings of belongings, of greatness, of omnipotence is dearer to him than his personal awareness and understanding. The lonely prisoner in a totalitarian prison camp is more easily compelled to surrender gradually to the collective thinking of his guardians when part of his own infantile thinking has been conditioned to give in to strong suggestive power. He has to communicate with his guardians lest he be delivered to his own private delusions. Only a few remain their true selves in that heroic battle. The situation of our prisoners of war in Korea, who lived there for months and years, cannot be studied without taking into account the atmosphere of mass delusion. In a sphere filled with rumors without opportunity to verify the facts, the mind is ever on the alert, but its observations are distorted. The process of mass brainwashing with continual propaganda made it very difficult for the individual to observe his comrades objectively. In such surroundings, it is easy to make an innocent scapegoat for all the suffering of the group, and facts can easily be hallucinated in such an atmosphere of mass contagion. In one of the prison camps, I had to make a report about a man who was exorcised and even attacked by the others because of his brute homosexual behavior. During the investigation, no fact, no victim could be reported. Rumors, there were plenty, expressing hatred toward the lonely, sarcastic, unsocial being, and who had aroused the latent homosexual feelings of the other campers, thereby attacking their manliness. No POW accused of collaboration with the enemy should be convicted without a study having been made of the rumors rampant in his camp. In totalitarian surroundings, hardly anyone keeps his thinking free of contagion, and nearly everyone becomes, albeit temporarily, the victim of delusion.
And that was Mass Delusion from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, rules for retrogrades, 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 24. When a rival or overlord like Alexander the Great comes to visit you, offering gifts, be the philosopher Diogenes the Cynic. Tell the radical mob or despot that you want nothing from them except that they stand out of your light. In a rule above, the retrograde exemplar was Alexander. In this case, the exemplar is his adversary, Diogenes, who scornfully rebuffed the great ruler. Consider Plutarch's account of the strange encounter between two of the most dissimilar great men in history. Thereupon, many statesmen and philosophers came to Alexander with their congratulations, and he expected that Diogenes of Sinope also, who was tarrying in Corinth, would do likewise. But since that philosopher took not the slightest notice of Alexander, and continued to enjoy his leisure in the suburb Cranion, Alexander went in person to see him, and he found him lying in the sun. Diogenes raised himself up a little when he saw so many people coming towards him, and fixed his eyes upon Alexander. And when that monarch addressed him with greetings and asked if he wanted anything, "Yes," said Diogenes, "stand a little out of my sun." It is said that Alexander was so struck by this and admired so much the haughtiness and grandeur of the man who had nothing but scorn for him, that he said to his followers, who were laughing and jesting about the philosopher as they went away, "But truly, if I were not Alexander, I wish I were Diogenes." And Diogenes replied, "If I wasn't Diogenes, I would be wishing to be Diogenes too." Here's the moral of the story. Never accept a gift or a nicety from an opponent, much less from the social justice mob. Never embrace an entitlement, bread or circuses, offered by Machiavellian politicians. Bread and circuses prove to be the wage by which radicals purchase their ill-gotten office and by which the individual is parted from his liberty. Acceptance of economic favors from radicals puts one into their debt and robs the goodly man of his honor and self-possession. In other words, be magnanimous, offering aid to all in your path, but accepting it only from the most trusted friends, even then, only with great hesitation. Once in a great while, one meets a radical not completely inoculated against the winsome allure of extemporaneous Christian virtue. Do not hold your breath, but you may just convert a radical through your example of magnanimity. Aristotle defines the virtue of magnanimity in the following terms. The great-souled, magnanimous man is fond of conferring benefits, but ashamed to receive them, because the former is a mark of superiority and the latter of inferiority. He continues down the page, it is also characteristic of the great-souled man never to ask help from others, or only with reluctance, but to render aid willingly, and to be haughty towards men of position and fortune, but courteous towards those of moderate station, because it is difficult and distinguished to be superior to the great, but easy to outdo the lowly. It is like putting forth one's strength against the weak. In these short lines, Aristotle explains why the magnanimous Diogenes would rebuff a man so admirable as Alexander, because he alone was worthy of a challenge. He alone was worthy of Diogenes's haughtiness. The retrograde must reclaim classical magnanimity for himself and for his people. He must learn to emulate both the great-souled man's virtue and his contempt for the mob. Aristotle closes by mocking pretenders to magnanimity who merely imitate the great-souled man without being really like him, only copying him in what they can, reproducing his contempt for others, but not his virtuous conduct. For the great-souled man is justified in despising vicious people. His estimates are correct, but most proud men have no good ground for their pride. Retrogrades, be restored to magnanimity, reclaiming righteous contempt for vicious men, but first reclaim virtue. Remain unattached and unindebted to the mob.
And that was Rule 24 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
Blowout equals mandate, and Walker got one of those as well. Now it's up to Walker to honor that mandate, and if he does, he can probably be president of these United States one day if he wants to be. Now contrast Walker's booming with Tim Pawlenty's bust. Pawlenty was also elected governor of a traditionally blue state, and did some good things, though none of them nearly as bold as Walker did taking on the government sector employee unions that are at the core of the Democrat Party base. After serving 2 terms as Minnesota governor, Pawlenty ran for president. Despite spending more money leading up to the crucial Iowa straw poll than any of his fellow competitors, and the fact Iowa is a neighboring state he visited enough to qualify for residency, Pawlenty was out of the race 5 months before the actual Iowa caucuses because of a poor showing in the Iowa straw poll. Perhaps it's because folks saw Pawlenty as a hack, and they see Walker as a leader. Remember when Pawlenty labeled Romneycare as Obamacare in an interview during the 2012 Republican presidential primary cycle? And then in a debate the very next day, cowardly declined to confront Romney directly when he had the chance? 3 days prior to the Iowa straw poll, Pawlenty looked me right in the eye and told me, quote, "I'm running so that someone like Romney doesn't become our nominee." He even took documentation of Romney's appalling record appointing judges in Massachusetts, where 22 of the 36 judges he appointed were Democrats. I shared this documentation with Pawlenty, and he brought it up at the pre-straw poll presidential debate 24 hours later. A month later, though, Pawlenty endorsed Romney for president. Now, Pawlenty isn't a rhino. He's a Republican. A rhino runs as pro-child killing and then governs that way. A rhino runs as big government and stays that way. A rhino runs as anti-family and pro-immorality and stays that way. A Republican runs as a conservative and may even do some conservative things when it's easy. But when push comes to shove, a Republican will put his own comfort ahead of his country. Rhinos are almost always native to traditional blue states, so they're easily identifiable. Republicans are more versatile, which makes them more dangerous and more prevalent. Since they offer no real threat to the liberal power structure, they can win in blue states, and since they know what conservatives want to hear, they can win in red states. Former Congressman J.C. Watts once told me, conservatives are in danger of devolving from a movement to an industry, and the closer we come to that happening, the more Republicans will roll off the assembly line of the machine. Republicans are a cancer that is metastasizing and eating away at the conservative movement, and taking the country down with them. They act as human shields between us and the statists, because when we take a stand, it reveals their own cowardice and duplicity. Don't waste time wondering what the motivation for their treachery is, because whether it's gutlessness or corruption, the end game is still the same. Any good pastor will tell you part of his job is to feed sheep and shoot wolves. Sheep are some of the most naive creatures on the planet and will walk right into a slaughter if they don't have a shepherd. They are in need of constant care, discipling, mercy, and tending. Wolves, however, are pure predators. When wolves are allowed among the sheep, they devour the sheep. The most dangerous wolves of them all are the ones in sheep's clothing, or the treason within Cicero once described. All of us, including our politician, makes mistakes as either sheeps or wolves. Some of our elected officials are decent public servants who just make mistakes because nobody's perfect. They would be sheep. You can tell if they're sheep because they either don't know any better, or when confronted with the right path, they acknowledge they were on the wrong one. For example, during the 2012 presidential cycle, I was impressed with the way Newt Gingrich was willing to speak openly and be held accountable for his past adultery and failed marriages. Whenever it came up on the Iowa caucus campaign trail, I never once saw him try to avoid the subject or act like there were bigger things to talk about in the campaign. He even did an interview on my show the week before the 2012 Iowa caucuses with Donald Wildman of the American Family Association addressing the topic once more. I met several of his family members who were willing to vouch for the positive change in his life. And I'm always suspicious of men trying to sell you on them as a leader when their own families aren't around and don't seem publicly invested in what they're doing, because these are the people that know them best. I also talked to people like Pastor Jim Garlow in San Diego, who had spent some time personally discipling Gingrich in recent years. However, a wolf not only doesn't know the right path, he doesn't want to know. A wolf has no intention of being anything other than a wolf. Sure, for a time he might dress up like grandma to fool Little Red Riding Hood, but sooner or later, the claws will come out. An example of this would be Mitt Romney. People have asked me for years why I'm so hard on his past betrayals of conservative orthodoxy when Ronald Reagan was once pro-child killing and gave us no-fault divorce. The difference is Reagan openly discussed his mistakes and failures and didn't try to cover them up. In fact, what Reagan once said the greatest regret of his political career was signing the first no-fault divorce law in America. Another sign of true repentance is when someone feels the responsibility to act on their newfound conviction and make up for past mistakes. Reagan wrote the powerful book Abortion and the Conscience of a Nation to defend the moral conviction he once opposed, and was the originator of the so-called Mexico City policy that prohibited the U.S. government from exporting child killing beyond our shores. This humility and transparency from Reagan inspires integrity in others. I'm not saying Reagan was a saint, because he wasn't. He was just a man. A good man doesn't have to be perfect, but he does have to be consistent, meaning over the long haul of his life, you may see ups and downs, but overall, you see long obedience in the right direction. Unfortunately, supporting Romney cost others their credibility. To this day, Romney remains unrepentant as he flip-flops with impunity and continues to lie and distort his liberal record as governor of Massachusetts, like signing Romneycare and its taxpayer-funded abortions for just $50 a kill, free for low-income women. He signed that into law after his alleged pro-life conversion, like failing to sign the Susan B. Anthony or Personhood USA pro-life pledges during the 2012 presidential campaign. And like a bad rash, Romney keeps coming back. Like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees in a cheesy 80s slasher flick, he cannot be stopped. Like the character Milton Wadhams in the 90s cult classic Office Space, he refuses to accept his firing. Romney is Rasputin. They fed Rasputin wine and cakes laced with cyanide, and that didn't work. They shot Rasputin, and that didn't work. They beat him to a pulp, even removing his penis, according to legend, and that didn't work. They couldn't get rid of Rasputin until they bound his body and threw him into an icy river. By no means am I suggesting we treat Romney the same way. I'm simply suggesting that some people just can't seem to take a hint. You'd think that after you were rejected despite spending 5 years and a sizable chunk of your and others' fortunes to win the presidency, not to mention taking every side of each issue, you might come to the conclusion you're not wanted, especially given how quickly your base was willing to move on to the future the nanosecond after you lost. But some mosquitoes refuse to be swatted away. The GOP establishment's latest master plan that backfired reemerged after his election loss to, quote, assert himself as a party elder. Whatever the Sam Hill that means. Normally, elders are men of wisdom, vision, consistency, and substance. Since Romney is none of those things, he apparently fits right in as an elder in today's dazed and confused Republican Party. See, in today's Republican Party, it's the loser who gets the spoils. Jimmy Carter may gallivant around the globe as an international man of mystery, but he's not been considered a serious player in Democrat Party politics since the embarrassment that was his presidency. Keep in mind that unlike Romney, Carter actually won the White House against an embattled incumbent president. Romney, ironically enough, finished with 47%. Why anybody would take seriously a man who was only the third person in American history to lose to a president who actually lost support from his previous election is beyond me. It would be like today's young NFL quarterbacks taking advice on how to win the Super Bowl from Tony Romo instead of Tom Brady. But there were rising GOP stars like Chris Christie, Paul Ryan, and Rand Paul lining up to be feted at a Romney retreat in 2013. And there was Romney urging Republicans not to defund Obamacare, which, don't forget, was actually Romney's horrible idea before Obama's. Instead, Romney urged the Republican Party to, quote, rally around electable candidates, unquote. Like Romney. You can't make this stuff up. Dan Balls of the Washington Post came on my show once to discuss his book, Collision 2012, about the 2012 presidential election, which was really a book about every election the Republicans have lost since 1976. The names just changed to protect the not-so-innocent. In the book, Ball said the Romney family took a poll about Dad running for president in 2012, and Willard himself wasn't in favor of running. Romney didn't want to run, but now he just can't stay away. Romney has now officially flip-flopped on everything. A man that wants to portray himself as a reluctant warrior has become a zit that will not pop, and he's not alone. Whether it's Bob Dole or John Littleball of Hate McCain, Several past GOP nominees have come out of the woodwork to provide their unsolicited, unsage advice on why the GOP keeps losing.
And that was part 2 of Chapter 4 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
Mrs. Davis, currently streaming on the Peacock Network, is my favorite show. The heroine of the story is Sister Simone, a member of a community of nuns who have purposely endeavored to live off of the grid. The grid in question is Mrs. Davis, who's not a person, but rather a massively powerful internet algorithm, an artificial intelligence which can order and manipulate human beings at will. The core of the drama is Sister Simone's quest to destroy Mrs. Davis, to turn it off and set people free. I believe that Mrs. Davis, this program, is a prophetic warning that something qualitatively different is in play when we're talking about artificial intelligence and the pervasiveness of the internet. The algorithms of the social media are, in myriad ways, manipulating us, getting us to think and desire in such a way as to foster the economic and political interests of others. Take a look at your phone. How much screen time you put in last week? And then ask yourself honestly, how much of your thinking and behavior was determined by that little machine? Next, compare how much time you spent praying to God. If the answers are disturbing, as I guess they'd be for most of us, ask yourself whether it might be time to think seriously about getting off the grid.
And that was Bishop Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
1,000? No, 26,595. All right, that's the markets. And now this. Nobody wants to talk about it, but everyone is talking about it. The president's age and infirmity. I believe we have a duty to report on this. It is a national security issue. The president's condition is getting worse. His handlers cannot hide it. Thursday, in a speech to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, he praised the Congressional Black Caucus. He didn't even pause to correct himself. At the United Nations, he walked off the stage without shaking the hand of Brazil's president. Was that a snub, or did he just wander off? At a fundraiser, he told a story about the events in Charlottesville. A few minutes later, he told the same story, almost word for word. Now, that's a memory loop. It's what happens when you lose your train of thought, and it happens a lot when you get old. Now, look, you can dismiss all of this. You can say we're just nitpicking, we're just piling on. But this is the President of the United States, and to repeat, his condition is getting worse. There is a gaffe almost every day. At the heart of our concern is Vice President Kamala Harris. She is, as they used to say, a heartbeat away from the presidency. The administration is doing its best to bring some credibility to her. She's on a college tour and talked about climate anxiety, keeping people from having children. And she's just been appointed to lead the new federal office on gun violence and prevention. This is not working. Harris has no credibility as a president. I repeat for the umpteenth time, nobody believes that Joe Biden could do the job for another 5.5 years. And very few people believe that Kamala Harris is in any way ready for the Oval Office. The present deteriorating condition is a national security issue. The second hour of Varney is just getting started.
So this is Rich. So here he is, good old tourist, the bloody tourist Stuart Varney, who says, well, I think we have a duty to report on this. It makes Fox ratings. It gets them ratings, makes Fox rich, and makes Stuart Varney rich. They have a conflict of interest here. It used to be that back in the days of nonprofit news prior to 1980, that when the news organizations did news, they did it based on what was important. That was their criteria. Is this important? And everything was about their integrity and their credibility, because there was nothing else. There was no ratings. They didn't do if it bleeds, it leads kind of crap like they do today. So for Stuart Varney to sit here and lie to people and say, well, we do it because it's a national security issue, bullshit. You do it because it gets you ratings. It's controversial. Controversy sells. Fox gets ratings, and you get rich. Back in a minute. Thank you. Listening to Hugh-Hewitt speaking with a lady, I don't know who it was, that they were talking about of course, the loggerheads of the Republican Party in the House, and bills not getting passed. And so they were talking about, the lady was talking about the fact that a lot of the people that are voting to block the legislation are in safe districts. Safe, all red, bright red districts. And red as the color of Republicans is really ironic. But anyways, live in safe red districts. And she uses Matt Gaetz as an example. He doesn't have to worry about getting challenged. But there are other people that in the caucus that are going to have to, they may end up facing a tough re-election because of this, blah, 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 blah. So what? So what? And then Hugh-Hewitt went on to say, well, yes, he may live in a safe district, but he won't be able to run for governor because the party is split. Who cares? Who cares? Again, as I've said before, this is not the House of Republicans and Democrats. It's the House of Representatives. The issue here for Matt Gaetz is he representing his district? And if he is, then he'll get reelected. If he is not, then hopefully he will be voted out and the district will find somebody who will represent his interests. Now, in the larger perspective, because in the House and in the Senate, you got the two things. You got number one, you got to represent your district or your state, but also you have to be cognizant of the fact that whatever legislation you pass affects the entire country because it's a federal law. So that's the next question for Matt Gaetz and company and for Hugh-Hewitt is stopping this legislation in the best interests of the United States as a whole, looked at from the perspective of constituents, not from the perspective of office holders. I don't give a rat's ass about the office holders, and neither should anyone else. They're butlers. They should do as they're told. And that's that. So now, as far as blocking the legislation is concerned, is a government shutdown good or bad for America? And that's one of the things that the Republicans are failing to do, but they should do. The big weakness in the Democrats' argument when they say, oh my God, we'll have a government shutdown, is that the Republicans can make the case, at least theoretically, that a government shutdown is what's best for the country. This is what's best. But you got to make the case. If the issue becomes how to avoid a government shutdown, Republicans can't win. Nobody can win. Anybody that's thinking about right-sized government, constitutional government, can't win. Okay? Only the Democrats, socialists, etc., those are the only people that are going to win. You've got to be able to make the case to the people of the United States as a whole that a government shutdown is what's best for them. And then in the meantime, you can also use this for recruiting Democrats. Hey, Democrats, your party is failing you. You need to become a Republican and vote Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Maria-Bartiromo, and she makes a mistake, that all of the talk show hosts make. Listen.
Primary and comes out of the general a winner.
Well, we are all watching an economy and a country that is in decline. I don't think there's any secret about that at this point, Ambassador. These last two...
There we go. You can barely hear it. But she referred to Nikki Haley. Maria's interviewing Nikki Haley, and she referred to Nikki Haley as ambassador. Nikki Haley's not an ambassador. She used to be, but she isn't now. But all of the talk show hosts do this. If they have a former president on, they'll call him Mr. President. If they have a former secretary, they'll refer to them as Mr. or Madam Secretary. A former ambassador, they will call him ambassador. Why? Prestige. False prestige, to increase eyeballs, to increase the ratings. And this is what happens with for-profit news. Greed. And so what we need is non-profit news now. Thank you. And now a little bit more of Maria-Bartiromo.
All right, Kelly, thanks very much. Kelly O'Grady in L.A. John, what do you say? The strike could be coming to an end. Not the United Auto Workers, but Hollywood strike.
Does anybody really care about the strike? I wonder. I mean, I really enjoy the reruns. I actually thought they had better TV from years ago than what they supply today. So it's a big yawn for me. I could care less, and I'm pretty sure I'm not alone with those feelings.
What do you think? I think you might be right there.
So, did you hear her choke there when he said that? Because she is a member of the union, not necessarily the writers' union, but she's a member of SAG-AFTRA. She has to be on the air, to be part of Fox News and whatnot. Apparently, he's part of something called the Lonsky Group, so he's an investor or whatever. So apparently, he's not a union member. But that's why she choked, because SAG-AFTRA is supposed to be in solidarity with the writers' strike and the writers' union. So that's why she was because she wasn't sure whether or not she should go along with this or not. So again, another reason you got to know about this is because this is called conflict of interest. People that are interviewing strikers when they're part of a union that is supporting those strikers, but interviewing the strikers as though they are neutral, and they're not. So be aware of that. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Ayn Rand.
Well, yes, we're taught to feel concerned for our fellow man, to feel responsible for his welfare, to feel that we are, as religious people might put it, children under God and responsible one for the other. Now, why do you rebel? What's wrong with this philosophy?
But that is what, in fact, makes man a sacrificial animal. That man must work for others, concern himself with others, or be responsible for them. That is the role of a sacrificial object. I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself, but that he cannot demand that others give up their lives to make him happy. And nor should he wish to sacrifice himself for the happiness of others. I hold that man should have self-esteem.
And that was Ayn Rand. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Governor Greg Abbott.
We have a president who is an obstructionist to Texas, who's trying to do our best to impede the flow of illegal immigrants by us building our own border wall, by us putting up these razor wire barriers and not allowing people to pass, by deploying the National Guard to make sure that we repel migrants who are trying to get into the country. And what do we have? We have Joe Biden interfering with my efforts to secure the actual border. I've never seen a president flout the laws of the United States as much as Joe Biden, and I've never seen someone like that obstruct a governor who actually is trying to limit illegal immigration into our country.
And that was Governor Greg Abbott. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Jonathan-Turley on Fox News.
He doesn't really explain a lot of these details. First of all, he says, I never considered anyone else for the special counsel. And he says, because I didn't want to disrupt the investigation. That's exactly why most of us were saying you should pick someone else as special counsel. There was a need to disrupt the investigation. You had two whistleblowers that had come forward to say that essentially the fix was in. You even have, liberal commentators saying the Hunter Biden case was an unholy mess. And so why would you want
want to continue that. I mean, disruption sometimes is a good thing. Second, these investigations were already fairly advanced. If you brought in another person for special counsel, they wouldn't have to start at the very beginning, right? They would review what their options were, what was still remaining on the table, and move relatively quickly. But Garland refused to deal with even the most procedural questions. I mean, his entire appearance could have been avoided by just sending a note to Congress saying, go pound sand. I mean, that's basically what he was saying. They were saying, can you answer some basic questions here? And he said, no, I'm not going to do it. And this is where we get to this maddening part. For example, he says, look, Weiss had total authority to go to California and D.C. to bring those cases. And if he didn't, it was just a question of partnering. And those two U.S. attorneys said, we're not going to help you. Well, why? I mean, the lack of curiosity of the Attorney General is breathtaking. Why would two U.S. attorneys tell the Delaware U.S. Attorney, we're not going to help you? Why at that point wouldn't the Attorney General say, can I intervene here to help you along the way? Why did Weiss just basically take all of his stuff and go home? All those are questions that aren't answered. And I'll note one other thing, John. In the first few minutes of questioning, Attorney General said something that I thought was quite remarkable. They said, basically these members were saying, we need these answers. And he said, you're going to get the answers from Weiss. And then he said, when Weiss gives you his report. Well, a report from a special counsel tends to come at the end of the investigation. Mm-hmm. That would put this on the other side, likely, of the election, and probably after any impeachment inquiry.
And that was Jonathan-Turley on Fox News. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Aristotle for Everybody, Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler.
Chapter 15. What we have a right to expect from others and from the state. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Both of these familiar maxims relate yourself to others. Both appear to make yourself the pivot of your action toward others. Love yourself and love your neighbors in the same way, and even, perhaps in the same measure as you love yourself. Think of how you wish others to behave toward you, and behave in the same way toward them. We seem to have reversed that order by considering first, in the preceding chapter, what others have a right to expect from us, and now, in this chapter, what we have a right to expect from others. It would be more accurate to say that we have risen above an order that puts us first and others second. Rights are rights. If any one human being has them, based upon needs that he or she shares in common with all other human beings, then all the others have the same rights too. It makes no difference whether you think first of your own rights or first of the rights of others. However, there is a sense in which you do come first. First, in the order of thinking about what you should do. The ultimate goal that should control all your practical thinking, your choices, and your action is a good life for yourself. You are under an obligation to live as well as it is humanly possible to do, to obtain and possess in the course of a lifetime all the things that are really good for you. Justice, as we have seen, does not require you to promote, by positive action on your part, the happiness of others, as you are required to pursue your own by the love you bear yourself. Justice only requires you not to impede or frustrate others in their pursuit of happiness. If you go beyond that to help them in their pursuit, you do so because you love them as you love yourself. Your rights and the rights of others, with which justice is concerned, are based on the things that are really good for any human being because they fulfill needs inherent in human nature. Thinking about what is good, and especially about what is really good, must precede thinking about rights. For example, if you did not think that having a certain amount of wealth, having a satisfactory degree of health, and having freedom are really good for you, you would not be led to say that everyone has a right to these things, not only as means to living, but also as means to living well. What you have a right to expect from others is, therefore, the same as what they have a right to expect from you. Rights are the same because everyone's rights are the same, and because what is really good for you is really good for every other human being. And that is so, because all of us are human, all of us have the same human nature, inherent in which are the same fundamental needs calling for fulfillment. Among those needs is the need to live in association with other human beings. We are not the kind of animal that can go it alone. As we have seen, human societies, families, tribes, and states have arisen to fulfill this need. But they also help us to fulfill other needs, our need for goods on which the preservation of life itself depends, and our need for higher goods on which living a good life depends. Although society is itself good because we need to live in association with other human beings, a particular society may not be good if the way it is organized or the way it operates either fails to help or positively hinders individuals who are members of it in their efforts to acquire and possess things that are really good for them. For example, a family is not a good family if it does not give the children in it the freedom they have a right to, if it does not care for their health, if it does not help them to grow up as they should. This does not mean that the family itself is a bad thing, for young children cannot preserve their own lives and grow up without families. It means only that a particular family is not good because it does not do for its children what they have a right to expect from it. In his concern with what is good and bad, Aristotle is concerned with good and bad societies, as well as with good and bad human beings, and with their good and bad lives. What has already been said about society itself being good is, for him, a simple, common-sense observation. We cannot get along at all without living in society. Beginning there, Aristotle then goes on to consider what makes a particular society good, or one society better than another. And just as his ultimate question about human life is about the best life that each of us can live, so his ultimate question about society is about the best society in which we can live and pursue happiness. Since Aristotle thinks that of all human societies, the state, or political society, is the one that most enables us to live the good or civilized life, let us concentrate on his answers to questions about the good state and the best state. It seems obvious to him that a good state is one that is governed well. That, for Aristotle, is as obvious as it is to say that a good life is one that is lived well. For him, a state cannot exist without government. Human beings cannot live together peacefully and harmoniously in the absence of government. That might not be true if all human beings were friends and loved one another. It might not even be true if all humans were perfectly just, so that there was no need for the enforcement of just laws to prevent one individual from injuring another. But Aristotle knew from common experience that all human beings are not bound together by love or friendship, that most human beings are not perfectly just, and that some are quite unjust in their selfishness. That is why his common-sense conclusion was that government is necessary for the existence of a state or a political society. Being necessary, government itself is good, just as society itself, being necessary, is good. However, as we have seen, a particular society may be bad or not as good as it should be. So, too, a particular form of government may be bad or not as good as it should be. It has been said by some who lack Aristotle's common sense that government is not necessary at all. They fail to see that human beings, being as they are, not as one might wish they were, cannot live together peacefully and act together for a common purpose without living under a government having the power to enforce laws and to make decisions. It is not only that criminals must be restrained. In order that a number of individuals may act together for a common purpose, there must also be some machinery for making the decisions that their concerted actions require. It has also been said that, although government may be necessary, it is a necessary evil because it involves the use of coercive force, the force used in the enforcement of laws, and because it involves limitations on the freedom of the individual. Those who say this fail to understand very important points that Aristotle makes about the enforcement of laws and about the limitations on the liberty of individuals in a society. According to Aristotle, the good man, the virtuous man who is just, obeys just laws because he is virtuous, not because he fears the punishment that may follow from his breaking the law or disturbing the peace. He obeys laws and keeps the peace voluntarily, not under the coercion of law enforcement. He is not coerced by government, and so for him government is not an evil, as it is for the bad man. Nor does the good man feel that his freedom is limited by government. He does not want more freedom than he can use without injuring others. Only the bad man wants more freedom than that, and so only he feels that his freedom to do as he pleases, without regard for others, is limited by government. The fact that government itself is necessary and good does not make all forms of government good, or as good as they should be. For Aristotle, the line that divides good from bad forms of government is determined by the answers to the following questions. First, does the government serve the common good of the people who are governed, or does it serve the selfish interests of those who wield the power of government? Government that serves the self-interest of the rulers is tyrannical. Only government that promotes the good life of the ruled is good. Second, does the government rest merely on the power at the disposal of the rulers, or does it rest on laws that have been made in a way to which the ruled have agreed, and in the making of which they've had a part? Government that rests solely on might or force, whether it be in the hands of one man or more than one, is despotic, even when it is benevolent or well-disposed, rather than tyrannical. To be good, government must have authority that those who are ruled acknowledge and accept, not merely power or force that they fear and submit to from fear. Government that is good in this way, Aristotle called constitutional government or political government. By calling such government political, he meant to suggest that it is the only form of government that is proper for states or political societies. This brings us to a third question. It applies to government that is neither tyrannical nor despotic, but constitutional. A government based on laws, in which even those who govern are ruled by laws. About such government we have to ask, is the Constitution, the fundamental law on which the government itself is based, a just constitution? And are the laws made by that government just laws? Aristotle for Everybody by Mortimer-Adler continued, any government that is not tyrannical is to that extent good. Among non-tyrannical governments, a constitutional government is better than a despotic one. And among constitutional governments, the best is the one with a just constitution and with just laws. In praising constitutional government, Aristotle speaks of it as the government of free men and equals. He also speaks of it as that form of government in which the citizens rule and are ruled in turn. Those who are ruled by a despot are subjects, not citizens with some voice in their own government. Those who are ruled by a tyrant are no better off than slaves. In both cases, they are ruled as inferiors, not equals. Only those who, being citizens, are ruled by other citizens whom they have chosen to hold public office for a time, are ruled as equals, and as free men should be ruled. At this point in his thinking, Aristotle made a serious mistake. Living at a time and in a society in which some human beings were born into slavery and treated as slaves, as well as a society in which women were treated as inferiors, he made the mistake of thinking that many human beings had inferior natures. He did not realize that those who appeared to be inferior appeared to be so as the result of the way in which they were treated, not as a result of inadequate native endowments. Making this mistake, he divided human beings into two groups. On the one hand, he placed those who were fit to be ruled as citizens, as free and equal, and with a voice in their own government. On the other hand, he placed those who were fit only to be ruled despotically, either as subjects or slaves, without a voice in their own government, and so as neither free nor equal. We live at a time and in a society in which no one can be excused for making Aristotle's mistake. Correcting his mistake, we are led to the conclusion that all human beings should be governed as citizens, with a voice in their own government, and thus be ruled as free and equal. The only exceptions to that all-inclusive all are those who are still in their infancy or those who are mentally disabled. Reaching this conclusion just stated, we also see that constitutional government is just only if its constitution gives all human beings the equal status of citizenship, without regard to sex, race, creed, color, or wealth. In doing so, it also gives them the freedom they have a right to, the freedom of being ruled as citizens, not as slaves or subjects. One human being is neither more nor less human than another, even though one may be superior or inferior to another in many other respects, as a result of differences in native endowments or acquired traits. These inequalities should certainly be considered in the selection of some human beings rather than others to hold public office, but they should be totally disregarded in considering the qualifications for citizenship. All human beings are equal as humans. Being equal as humans, they are equal in the rights that arise from needs inherent in their common human nature. A constitution is not just if it does not treat equals equally, nor is it just if it does not recognize the equal right of all to freedom, to be ruled as human beings should be ruled, as citizens, not as slaves or subjects. We now have reached one answer to the question about what we have a right to expect from the state in which we live and the government under which we live. We have a right to be ruled as citizens under a government to which we have given our consent, and which allows us to have a voice in that government. Is that all we have a right to expect? Even though he made the mistake of thinking that only some human beings had the right to be ruled as citizens, Aristotle thought that those human beings had a right to expect more from the state in which they lived. The best state, in his opinion, was one that did everything it could do to promote the pursuit of happiness by its citizens. That remains true whether only some human beings or all should be citizens. What can a state do to promote the pursuit of happiness by its citizens? It can help them to obtain and possess all the real goods that they need and have a right to. To understand this, we must remember one point made in the preceding chapter. Of all the real goods we must have in order to live well, some are more and some are less within our individual power to acquire and possess. Some, like moral virtue and knowledge, depend largely on the choices we ourselves make. Some, like wealth and health, depend to a considerable extent on our having good luck or on our being blessed by good fortune. The main ways in which a good state and a good government can help its individuals in their pursuit of happiness is to do what it can to overcome deprivations they suffer as a result of bad luck or misfortune, not as a result of fault on their part. It should do for them what they cannot, by choice and effort, do for themselves. The best state and the best government are those that do the most in this direction. The one thing that no state or government can do, no matter how good it is to make its citizens morally virtuous. Whether or not they acquire moral virtue depends almost entirely upon the choices each of them makes. The best state and the best government can, therefore, only give its citizens external conditions that enable and encourage them to try to live well. It cannot guarantee that, given these conditions, they will all succeed. Their success or failure ultimately depends on the use they make of the good conditions under which they live their lives.
And that was Aristotle for Everybody, Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.